every organization is evolving, doing more, and data is kind of the basis of all of their AI, garbage in, garbage out, as they say. So you kind of have to have the right data. AI is grounded on it.
This is It's About Data, episode 81. We had a conversation with Dipti Borkar to talk about Microsoft Fabric, open data, and the data problems that matter now.
Well, hey everybody. I'd like to welcome an old friend here that I've gotten to know very well during our labors and toils during the era of big data. Speaking of Dipti Borkar, and who is now Vice President and General Manager of OneLake and Fabric Ecosystem at Microsoft. Dipti, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I find it funny that we're actually recording this because this is going to be like our every conversation, which is about data and increasingly AI. So,
and what's beautiful is that you just stated the title of our whole channel. It's about data.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for the marketing.
We appreciate the plug. But anyway, it kind of take us, it's almost like with Fabric in terms of how the platform has grown. It almost seems like, where do we start on this? And maybe you can kind of give us kind of like sort of a top-down tour of what we're talking about here in this whole ecosystem and what you're involved with.
Yeah, absolutely. So Fabric is our data platform for the AI age, right? Every organization is evolving, doing more, and data is kind of the basis of all of their AI, garbage in, garbage out, as they say.
Yeah.
So you kind of have to have the right data. AI is grounded on it. And Fabric is a platform that's all encompassing. Not only does it have our data factories, so your ETLs, pipelines, right, data flows, etc., all the way to actually the reporting and the dashboards, etc., with Power BI and everything in the middle, all built on top of a very strong open platform and an open lake, which is OneLake. And so, quick in terms of what I do at Microsoft, I'm responsible for OneLake, which is a foundation of Fabric, as well as the Fabric ecosystem, which means all the integrations into Fabric, whether it's OneLake, whether it's our platform. And it's been exciting to see kind of the momentum of Fabric over these past several years to see how much it's grown and how much it encompasses. It has a real time that's part of it. There's analytics, Spark, which we've enhanced pretty significantly, data warehouse, a disaggregated stack, and now databases as well. And Database Hub includes SQL, NoSQL, and so on. And increasingly the context for AI, which is Fabric IQ. So that's kind of, in short, all of that together is Fabric. But Satya, when we launched the product, said the best feature of Fabric is the business model. You buy one thing and you get it all, right?
Yeah.
And that's truly important because as customers there's a lot out there. There's a lot of choices and so on. And customers, they start off with one or two workloads typically, and then you keep adding more. So it's been phenomenal to kind of see that growth of Fabric, and how OneLake truly has become this open platform, not just for Fabric, but for multiple engines, all open format. It was a big deal for us to move to all open formats with open source formats, from a completely closed SQL ecosystem, right? I mean, imagine 30 years and then moving to everything that's open. Yeah.
Yeah, like SQL Server is still very much there. Like it backs things like Azure SQL Database is still based on SQL Server. But
Absolutely.
In general, customers want just a much bigger ecosystem of tools, of interoperation. And before we kicked out the show, we were talking about that a bit and how the business model in the cloud used to be all about egress fees and keeping, it was this complex frenemy situation, right? You want to bring other partners in, but you also want to keep them at a safe distance. What's changed? I mean, we're seeing, Tony was recently at SAP Sapphire. They talked a lot about interop, about letting other companies access their data. We're seeing that a lot from Microsoft as well. Many partners that can read and write in OneLake. What has caused that shift in strategy for the cloud vendors and at Microsoft specifically?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that OneLake is truly differentiated in that way that other clouds or other data platforms don't have one in that sense, and it truly is open. I kind of joke sometimes. I'm the Switzerland in Azure, right? Welcome everyone, and the reason is that data is truly that core to everything,
Hmm.
right? And so if you don't, you can lock it up, you can close it out, but the pie that you of the market or the share of market that you're going to have is actually going to be smaller and not bigger, right?
Yeah.
And so we truly believe that when we open and when we have give customers a choice on the engines, of course we are biased with 2 hours and use the fabric workloads, but there are different use cases, and at the core, at the OneLake level, we want to support the different open source engines. You might use DocDB with,
Mm.
for some use
Hmm.
cases, and just an open source project. You might want to use. You might have existing estates, right, in with SAP or Snowflake or Databricks, and the premise of OneLake is one copy of your data for all of these. Right, so we've announced bidirectional interop with SAP. Snowflake, for example, is completely available in as generally available and runs on OneLake. You can read and write natively from Snowflake, which is, sometimes you'd wonder, is that right? Like it's actually running in some ways, on the Fabric Foundation, and it is because you could write from Snowflake and you could read from a Fabric data warehouse. You could write, from a Fabric Spark and read it in Databricks, and I think that interop actually creates a lot of value for our customers. And at the end of the day, that's what this is about. Interop brings a lot of value to our customers. All of this is built on Delta Lake and Iceberg. So foundationally, OneLake supports both these formats, and I think we're the very few vendors to fully support both these, because otherwise it's left to the customer to deal with, right? I mean,
Mhm.
Yeah.
you acquire a company, or they're on Iceberg,
Right.
but the rest of it is on Delta Lake, and we just do the translation. We use open formats and open standards. Xtable is an open source project that we've
Hmm.
based. We were members of it, and so we actually use it to do the work ourselves. So the customer doesn't need to care whether it's Iceberg, whether it's Delta Lake. Either works all the time, and with any platform. So it truly is a very different world. And the reason this is important is, at the end of the day, for AI, you want to have a unified view of your data.
Hmm.
Otherwise, you're going to get incomplete answers, inconsistent answers, because you don't have the full view. And it's very hard to have, parts of the fragmented world sort of unified with AI. And that's where OneLake comes in, where not only can it support other platforms in the interop, but it truly is multi-cloud. You can actually shortcut data from S3, GCP, on-prem. And so what you get is, leave the data where it is. You don't need to migrate. In some ways, migration is a bad word. Like, leave it where it
Yeah.
is. Get a unified view of your entire data estate, and then from there build on top. And that could be obviously with our engines, amazing price performance with our Spark, for example, or you could use open source, or you could use other products, right? So
Hmm.
that kind of becomes a foundation, and you're never locked in, right?
Right.
Like, you're really never locked in, and hopefully we've left that old world behind.
Yeah, no, it's really fascinating. You're talking about, the interop of all that. Of course, when Databricks bought Tabular, I think that kind of settled the question of, like, this is just going to become a different, between the whole differences between Delta and Iceberg are going to become non-issues, in the long run. And so I think we're seeing that. The other thing also is the juxtaposition here. Of course, next month. Well, actually, when we're recording this, so we'll be when we air this, it'll be in the past. But in June, basically, you'll be holding Build in San Francisco, same time as Snowflake's holding its summit, and then a couple weeks later, of course, Databricks. And you work with both companies. Um,
Yes.
and what I'd like to ask here is just some of the scenarios that you've been working with your customers, where they use these different platforms interchangeably, through OneLake.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an exciting time, right? Like
Yeah,
Summit, everything is together.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so it's going to be an overload of information, really, like with a lot of announcements. It's it's at the end of the day, customers, users, right? They have their own stacks, they have different use cases, and so on, right? And what we're seeing, and we actually got asked by customers to add support, native support for some of these. Native support for some of these products, right? And so that's where the demand and the roadmap came from, is customers asking for it, right? So specifically, let's take an example of let's say a supply chain company. They're in the in the space where they have a ton of data that they need to munch and bring together. They may use they're dependent on what their customers use, perhaps as well, right? And so they might want to use Snowflake for certain use cases, but they want to use downstream. They want to use semantic models and ontologies and NIQ. But how do you actually get all this data in without expensive pipelines, without multiple copies of data, right? Without having a big data engineering team that's constantly dealing with all of this? Well, wouldn't it be fantastic if you can just natively write Snowflake into OneLake and then use Power BI Direct Lake mode, which actually natively understands Delta Lake, build your dashboards, and on top of those semantic models that you just built, add in ontologies and do more with context and your AI and build that stack upwards. So this is real world architectures that are sort of coming about. You could switch Snowflake with Databricks, for example, and we have capabilities to either mirror that data in OneLake using shortcuts. So shortcuts is our mechanism of linking data without copying it, right? So it's truly linked. Think Symlink or data virtualization. And now that the pipes are really fat, physics is not a problem. So they really work well. Millions of shortcuts created by customers, and these architectures are working quite well. So that's one example of a use case. Of course, there's many more. We're seeing AI obviously be a big driver for it. We're seeing use cases where customers want to shortcut data from S3 to OneLake and then use Foundry on top of it, because OneLake is not just integrated with Fabric; it's actually integrated into the entire Microsoft ecosystem. So you can go to Excel and open OneLake Hub in the Explorer and drag and drop data that's sitting in Delta Lake just on your desktop, or Foundry and build agents on top, or obviously Power BI. So you get the value of the entire ecosystem with this interop. And depending on your use cases, you might be constrained by your customers and what they use, or you want to have options or multiple clouds, and OneLake kind of becomes that common fabric, pun intended, across these scenarios. Yeah.
So I think a lot of what you're getting at is that data interop, basically data integration, is much more built in, much more of a baseline capability than it used to. And me coming from the data engineering world with clients, that's a lot of what I was doing in 2022 and 2023. And now I really welcome this level of interop. But like, from your perspective, what's the job of data engineers now, or ML engineers even, if a lot of the data integration is taken care of? Do we still need data engineers? Like, what should engineers and data managers be focusing on if the integration is much easier than it used to be 3 years ago?
Absolutely. That's a great question, right? Because, and you would say that, of course, we've taken care of some of these, all the pipes that needed to be built no longer need to be built. But also there's AI, and AI is writing a lot more code. You could just ask Copilot to, write you a notebook that does integrates, actually builds this entire architecture for you, right, in hours. And so it's a completely new world, right? I would say, pre GPT, post GPT, it's a completely different world. And And I would say that, look, there is still a lot to do, right? Because
Yeah.
at the end of the day, if you think of the Industrial Revolution, people still had jobs after, but they were different, right?
Yeah.
And so what we're looking at now is getting more, doing more, and doing it more efficiently. So yeah, don't spend time on building pipelines, right? Like that's taken care of. Instead, focus on the layers on top, on the context building, on making sure that the data is actually very strong from a master data perspective. Data quality is high. A lot of organizations still have pretty poor, data quality and so on. So then you start to focus on higher order, contexts, which is going to improve the quality of AI results, consistency, as well as correctness, right? Because then you start to get to, okay, how do we actually make sure everything is correct, even though it's AI, it's LLMs, and that they have safeguards, they have guardrails, et cetera, et cetera. That's kind of the next wave, right, of data engineering, data science. I think overall, the engineer is going to get collapsed into doing a lot more, right? And so we're seeing this across the board. Product manager is building apps now, right? And so data engineer will do everything in the context of data, and not just data in the old school data engineering, which was tended to be pipelines and so on and so forth. But it's going to be exciting. It's going to be a different world.
Right, and that's Dipti, and that's really going to be a great seg to our next episode, where we're going to talk about like what you actually do with the data, because what you're talking about here is that now that you've basically in the current generation, you've built the pipelines, you've built essentially kind of like like the mirroring the zero ETL. So there's a lot of basically sort of legwork that data engineers no longer have to do, but they really do have to focus on what the meaning is of data. And that's what I want to focus on the next part of our discussion. So Dipti, thanks for joining us today. We're looking forward to coming back to you again, and we're going to dive deeply in here in terms of what do you actually do, and how does the Fabric platform really support this? Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, folks.